us begin. Good evening, everyone. This is a public hearing of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The zoning ordinance empowers us to hear references from the City Council, petitions from other parties for variances and special uses, and appeals from the decisions of the zoning administrator. We hear testimony from those in attendance and then make formal findings of fact based on the evidence presented, which consists of testimony and exhibits, and on our knowledge of the community. We either then make a determination or recommendation to the City Council. Testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence and procedures, we ask that you keep your testimony relevant to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record and print your name. Well, let us know your name so that we can call on you. Each case will be introduced by staff and a list of documents will be read into the record. Then the applicant will give an explanation of the proposal. After that, those who wish to testify as either proponents or opponents of the case will have the chance to do so. And then the applicant will have a chance to respond. Any case not concluded at tonight's hearing will be continued to our next meeting. Melissa or Kay, could you please call the roll?
Chair Collin.
Here.
Member Miranchev.
Here.
Member Zordon.
Here.
Member Arvalo.
Here.
Member Puctel.
Here.
Member McCauley. And Member Deacon, both absent. So we do have a quorum, 5 of 7.
Perfect. Okay, any of our zoning members that were absent from the last meeting, will they certify for the record that they have read the transcript on any matters that were continued to tonight's hearing? I don't think we have anything continued. So I'm just going to move into our agenda. Can I have someone do a suspension of the rules so we can proceed digitally? Can I have someone make a motion for that? Anybody?
I will. I move that in light of the ongoing governor's state of emergency in the state of Illinois, that in light of COVID-19, that we hold this meeting, we suspend the rules and we hold this meeting electronically over Zoom.
A second?
Second.
Okay, are we calling the roll for every vote tonight, Kate?
Yes, we'll take the roll each time. Chair Collin.
Aye.
Member Miranchev.
Aye.
Member Zordon.
Aye.
Member Arvalo.
Aye.
Member Puctel.
Aye.
Perfect. Okay, so our first we have to approve the meeting minutes. Our last meeting, believe it or not, was November 17th of 2020. Can I get a motion for approval of those meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting on December 17th.
I'll second.
Chair Collin.
Aye.
Member Miranchev.
Aye.
Member Zordon.
Aye.
Member Arvalo.
Aye.
Member Puctel.
Aye.
Okay, great, that's passed. So moving on to our new business, our first case, 2648, 2650 Sheridan Road. Are the respondents here? Does anyone know who they are?
Arian, that would be you.
Yep, that's me.
Hi, and I'm David Meek. I'm the attorney for the applicant.
Okay, perfect. All right. Melissa, Cade, will you read this into the record?
Darian Halligan, owner of record, submits for major zoning relief to permit construction of a circular driveway. Specifically, the applicant seeks to construct a circular driveway on a lot with frontage along Sheridan Road, where circular driveways are permitted only on lots with frontage along either Crawford or Ridge Avenues. Zoning Code Section 6819B. The Zoning Board of Appeals is the determining body for this case.
Sir, would you like to explain your proposal, you or your representative?
Yes, I'll start on the proposal, and Darian will weigh in, add some color as necessary. Darian and his wife own two lots, actually, 2648 and 2650 Sheridan, which had been a single lot, recently subdivided into two. But Darien is bringing this back into conformance with the lot as it had previously existed with a single family residence. Darien's family is multi-generational. They have, he and his wife both have their mothers living with them, and they have two young children. And what they came to the city to propose is an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit addition to the house, and an attached garage to the house. And they had bought the properties. In fact, the properties had been permitted with a single curb cut off of Sheridan Road. And they've laid out a design for the accessory dwelling unit addition and a 3-car attached garage below, which includes a circular driveway, which they put into the plans because of the characteristics of the driveway to provide for safety, both in the street and for their own vehicular access out onto the street, for pedestrians and traffic on the street, because they wanted to be able to easily maneuver, safely maneuver in and out of the garage and safely exit onto Sheridan Road. And they felt that their location of an accessory dwelling unit on the lot was constrained by some of the peculiarities of the lot, being that it's not quite rectangular in the back. And so they couldn't locate the ADU in the back. And given that they had bought an existing new home, they were trying to minimize the amount of internal demolition that would need to be done to do an attached accessory dwelling unit. And so they, with their architect, settled on a design that kept the accessory dwelling unit in the front part of the house, sort of off to the side. And that limited the amount of front yard area. So within the front yard limits, but it created the constraints on the location of the ADU kind of dictated what kind of parking layout they might propose in the front. And the previous house actually had access onto Sheridan Road. They had actually an extra wide driveway, 24-foot wide curb cut, or 20-foot wide curb cut. Forgive me. We're proposing to restore the condition of single curb cut, but add a second curb cut, both of which in total would be about 24 feet of curb. But so the property does have a garage in the rear. The property owner's intent is to actually convert that into a studio and workspace and storage area. And I'll get into some peculiarities about the garage and its layout in relation to the alley and its inaccessibility.
Hey, David,
yeah.
One thing really quick. Cade, another supporter of mine who's going to speak on my behalf, is trying to get into the meeting.
Thank you, Darren.
Sure.
So the issue here in this case is one of taking a single curb cut and adding a second curb cut to serve one property. It was laid out as two lots with a single curb cut. The issue is really not about whether the property has or should use alley access, because it does have an existing curb cut. And the issue then is really whether a circular driveway is a better design option than a single curb cut, resulting in better, safer traffic movement to and from Sheridan Road for pedestrians and vehicles, and whether that design is more supportive of an accessory dwelling unit, which by its intent is really pertaining to and designed for the use by elderly. So the way this property would work under this proposal is that because of the orientation of the garages on the north end of the property, the curb at the north would be the natural inbound, and then people leaving would pull back out of the driveway and make a 90-degree turn rather than a 180-degree turn in order to then exit on the southbound end of the leg. And the current site plan, for your information, is on page 30 of your, 33 of your PDF. It's marked revised at the bottom. And you can see the configuration north is to the top of the page. So the we think that this location and this drive is allows for ease of movement onto the property and off of the property. And in particular, what's important to us is how readily negotiable is the exiting for elderly residents in particular of the property, and how well does it function for them to exit in a forward movement. As an aside, the curb cut that's been approved for the lot had a condition on it that the property owner utilized a 3-point turnaround so that they could exit forward facing from the lot. That was for a different anticipated house layout, which was more in the rear of the property. But now that lots are consolidated, that and the ADU location and connection to the existing home is constrained, that 3-point turnaround concept doesn't really have the requisite space to be designed and put on here, unless it exceeded the front yard lot coverage. So part of our argument here is that we are looking at a single variance. A 3-point turnaround would both be less desirable because of the challenges to the elderly to negotiate that, but also the layout would necessitate a much larger area coverage in the front yard, probably at 50% or so. And so we'd be asking for a variance for that. So we see this as really a choice in our proposal between a variance to allow a second curb cut where the coverage is compliant, or a variance to exceed the coverage for a 3-point turnaround. And our strong preference, of course, is for the exiting by the turnaround, by the circular drive, because we know that there are going to be tight maneuvers to do a 3-point turn, 180-degree exit off of this property, or tight maneuvers with a large pad to do a 3-point maneuver off of the property. That's the general gist. I would like to make sure we go through and address each of the standards for the granting of the variance. I think that we also wanted to point out a couple of thoughts on this. One, we thought that the circular design was more aesthetically pleasing from the street than the larger pad in front of the garage that would be necessary for the 3-point turn. We also, Darian went to great lengths to contact his neighbors, and he got letters of support, which are in the packet, from approximately 75% of the properties that are within 100 or 500 feet of the site. And in particular, he got almost all of the property owners immediately along Sheridan Road, north and south, not just adjacent properties, but all up and down north and south Sheridan Road on Clinton Place and across on Ingleside Park. Part of the context in this area, of course, is it's on Sheridan Road, which we know is a kind of a thoroughfare for people traveling to Northwestern, downtown Evanston, passing through Evanston from Chicago to some of the other suburbs. And Sheridan Road,
and the park that's right across the street.
Right. So you have Ingleside Park, that entrance is right across from here, and you have the park outside the street. And part of the concern with making sure that we have viable front-facing exiting is that rear-face exiting would be very complicated, especially going northbound, because of having to cross southbound Sheridan Road, cross the turning lane, and enter into northbound Sheridan Road's drive. And with elderly population, which the ADU is designed for this family and hopefully a successor family years from now, we want to create a situation that creates the best, safest access and egress for the people who are here, and frankly for guests and delivery vehicles. And that's an aside point I'd also like to make too. This circular drive provides some amount of guest parking for short-term guests, but also provides delivery and service vehicle parking. Sheridan Road doesn't allow parking anymore, and the parking in the streets that are proximate to this is pretty challenged, both by the existence of multiple curb cuts and some no parking sign restrictions. So we know from anecdotal evidence that people who've tried to visit the property have had to park 1.5 blocks away and make their way over. That's an especially challenging situation for somebody who is maybe an elderly friend who's coming to visit, and especially in inclement weather, coming by to visit and have to walk considerable distance to the house. With a circular drive in particular, we'd be able to have some amount of guest parking on the property, which we think is a desirable amenity here. And we also think that this layout fits within the context of this Sheridan Road corridor. So if you'd like, I should go through the various standards for the granting of a variance.
Could you hold on 1 second, sir?
Yeah.
I'd like our board to be able to ask you questions about what you just described.
Absolutely.
Okay, the board. Does anybody have any questions on it? Or do you want him to just go ahead?
I have questions. Are we forfeiting our ability then to ask questions after we run through with Mr. Mr. Meek of the conditions?
No, honestly, we can ask him questions at both points, but it's just that he gave a lengthy description of his proposal. So before he goes into the standards and why he feels like he meets them, I was wondering if we could address what he just talked about. Because I was over there again today myself, trying to see the property, and it was difficult for me to be able to even slow down in front of there because of where it is on Sheridan Road. So I do understand what you're saying.
I would actually prefer to hear Mr. Meek give his full explanation before we start.
You ask. Okay, Mr. Meeks, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. So this is a major variance request, and there's several standards. The first is that the proposal won't have a substantial adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, property values of neighboring properties. Well, first of all, we've presented you with all the neighbor letters of support, and we note that this front-loading condition is both approved and for single curb cut, and that conceptually the use of the front for driveway access is compatible. And the neighbors understand the challenges of getting into the property from Sheridan Road. And they recognize that the driveway plan is a safety improvement, and especially that we're providing an ADU for additional elderly residents. And there are other nearby properties on Sheridan Road which also have circular drives. So we think this property meets that standard, and frankly, the DAPR review staff also agreed with us. With respect to the next standard, that the proposal is in keeping with the intent of the zoning ordinance, DAPR didn't agree with us on this on the basis that they said we had alley access to an attached garage, and but we note that the property is approved for a single curb cut, and the variance here is not a variance with respect to whether a curb cut can be granted. It's really the difference between, the request is the difference between a single curb cut and a second curb cut for a circular drive. And although the zoning code expresses a preference for the use of alleys, if you look at 6-8-2-2, that preference for alley access is subject to exceptions where there are legally existing curb cuts, which we have here. So the curb cut is approved and available to my client irrespective of the existence of an alley garage. So in that respect, this proposal is in keeping with the intent of the zoning ordinance, that legal standard. And again, the variance is limited in scope to the request for essentially a secondary curb cut to facilitate the circular drive. And the only other alternative to this would be a variance for greater impervious lot coverage. So you're presented, frankly, with a question of which variance is more potentially acceptable, assuming standards, you find that standards are met. Also, I would note 6-16 2-2 regarding access to parking. This is again going to the intent of the zoning ordinance, and that provision says that all off-street parking shall be designed with appropriate means of access to a street or alley in a manner that will least interfere with street traffic movement. We would stipulate, we would think that the circular driveway is access in a manner that least interferes with street traffic and presents the best options for getting in and out of the property. Also recall that the existing garage is, while it exists, my client had always intended to convert that to work studio space, and that the garage as constructed, and it's a new garage, has some unique characteristics which make it a challenging garage, and particularly challenging on this alley. The alley is at an angle to the property. The garage is oriented kind of askew to the alleyway, and you can see this on the site plan, again, page 33. And it is the only garage that has that orientation to the alleyway. And I think, to my surprise and Darian's surprise, it makes it challenging, and Darian could speak to this better than I, to come into the property, and which direction you come in dictates how you can enter the garage because of the narrowness of the garage, of the driveway, the alley, and the fact that the opposite side of the alley has a solid wood fence, which constrains how much your front of your car can or can't cross over onto the neighboring property as you negotiate the turning movements, whether forward or back, into the garage. So the garage has some severe limitations in terms of accessibility. The third standard is whether the proposal has a hardship or practical difficulty that is peculiar to the property. And we've gone over some of these, but I'll just say that we have bought a property with a condition of an existing house and an existing garage. I just mentioned the constraints of the garage, and then the constraints of the lot layout, which dictated where the attached accessory dwelling unit could go, are matters that lead to the practical difficulty of having to locate the driveway setback where it is. And that I would note that compliance, again, with the 3-point turnaround as an option is not possible without a variance. This proposal takes into consideration how to best provide for elderly residents, and frankly, the safety being a particular concern with accessory dwelling units and access onto Sheridan Road, all of which factor into the consideration that this property presents some practical difficulties. And these aren't, this goes to the fourth standard, mere inconveniences, again, for really the same reasons. The ADU can't be located in the back of the lot. We could only construct an ADU by having purchased that empty lot to the north, which is where we've located the ADU in this situation. The fifth standard is that the purpose of the variance is not based exclusively on a desire to extract additional income from the property. This is an owner-occupied property, and they're not renting this out or deriving any additional income from this proposal. The sixth standard is that the hardship or practical difficulty has not been created by a person having interest in the property. DAFRA thought this standard wasn't met because they said that there were code compliant alternatives. We don't believe there are code compliant alternatives for all the reasons I've set forth below. There is an alternative, but it's not code compliant. We require a variance. That's the 3-point turnaround single curb cut. It wasn't a self-created situation in that we bought an existing home. And yes, we're trying to do an accessory dwelling unit, but any variance that comes before you is somebody requesting to do something. So it's really about the limitations that the site presented to us on where we could put an ADU that didn't require disrupting the entire integrity of the internal layout of the existing home. Let's see, then there is the final requirement that the proposal require the least deviation from the applicable regulation among the feasible options identified. And again, it's about a comparison of the deviation from lot coverage in the front yard for a single access with a 3-point turn versus the circular driveway. And we think that the hammerhead option, or that 3-point turn option, again, creates tight movements that are challenging for the elderly to negotiate, paved area that would extend into the north side yard, contrary to city design, driveway design requirements. And that this option would be less aesthetically pleasing. So we think, in conclusion, that our circular driveway plan is the best option in terms of scope of a request to deviation from standards, the best option in terms of safety, certainly convenience and aesthetics, and for extent of compliance, best option in terms of the extent of compliance with zoning regulations, and that it's functionally superior to a single driveway. Thank you.
Okay, questions from the board?
I have a question.
Yes, Carol.
You mentioned a couple of times that if it was the option with a single curb cut and a 3-way getting out of the garages, will need another variance about the impervious area.
Yes.
Was this a kind of shown graphically on any of your drawings? Did you explore this option?
Yes, Darian explored it with his architect. They actually did, and Darren, you can speak to this better than I can. It predated my involvement.
Yeah, I did explore it, and we do have a drawing of it. The initial drawing of it, the variance set was at 50%. And the reason why is because, we got three garages. When you're trying to maneuver a multi-point turn going back, we needed enough driveway space in order for there to be multiple places for that car to go to, especially in consideration that the ADU is for the elderly. Again, we chose the circular drive because we're able to do it with a 30%, which meets the variance. Also, because it's just a lot easier to not make that 180-degree turn. But then also the third piece is that, remember, there's going to be kids here. It's unrealistic to think that in a practical sense that kids are always going to be coming in and out of the garage. I've got kids, I've got my kids' kids. I didn't really wanted to minimize kids running over the driveway where somebody's trying to back out and maneuver and then loading the kids in and out. I just didn't want that conflict between the kids and the cars maneuvering. And with the circle drive, it is the absolute most minimal, easiest flow, because when you back straight out of the garage, and you basically just kind of turn forward and to the left, and the kids get loaded in and out of the passenger side. So those are the kind of things that we talked about and we looked at between the hammerhead and the circular drive.
Okay, thank you.
If
Sure.
I may jump in here, Member Miranchev, they never presented that plan to staff, so I don't know the numbers. I see no reason to think that that would trigger an impervious surface variation. I don't see how removing a curb cut in half of that driveway would increase the lot coverage. Yeah, I think it's also key to note that the ADU is not constructed, so if they did exceed the impervious surface, there are certainly ways they could reduce that lot coverage without triggering a variation. I also don't know if that included the earlier version where a large parking pad was located off the alley.
Thank you.
I can say that that did not include the large parking pad. When we're talking about impervious coverage, we're only speaking to the regulation for circular drives that the front setback coverage is limited to 30%. So it's the area from the east corner of the buildings.
But that wouldn't apply to a 3-point turn. Then it's not a circular driveway.
That's,
so there would be no 30%.
You're right. You're right. Actually, that is not. It would be the. I see what you're saying there. The 50%. It would be a 50% area coverage in that area, so it would be more area coverage, and so aesthetically it would look greater than what we're proposing in terms of impervious area in the front yard.
But it wouldn't trigger.
You are correct, as you say that because that requirement fell under the circular driveway regulations. Thank you for that correction.
I have a question. What is the status of the addition, the permitting?
It's being held right now based on this determination.
Thank you.
Question, you kind of alluded to it again there, Mr. Halligan, but I'm still not clear how a 3-point turnaround would be considered less safe than what you're proposing here. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can definitely talk through that. And, I think I have one of my supporters here, Alf McConnell, that can probably talk about safety pieces of that as well. But the workflow is that because the garage is located on the north side of the street, when the cars back out, they have to back out onto the south side, and that's where the main door of the garage is. So there's going to be kids that are going to be like running in and out, and we're going to have to cross the entire. If they have to back out, they would back out into the main, house. So they would back out and back out into the main house. And so I didn't want to have the kids running across the street where somebody is backing out to kind of be loaded on the passenger side, which is where, typically, at least that's kind of where how I load my kids and my family loads the kids. So we didn't want to be any conflict between kids running into the house and somebody backing out. Now, knowing that also this is for, the elderly, I have a hard time personally, every time I have to back out and turn at the same time, it's really difficult for me. I know it's difficult for anybody, and for an elderly person, I think it's difficult for them as well. And so the idea is really to minimize the difficulty of driving for the use case of this, which is for the elderly. And so I look at that as a safety component. And the reason why we thus then need way more driveway space in order to make the 3-point turn is so that there's not just kind of one little area for the cars to kind of back up into. there's just not a lot of space between where the ADU is located and where Sheridan Road is. I just don't have the space. I have very, very little space. So does that kind of answer your question about the safety concerns? I know I was concerned about the kids. I was also concerned about somebody backing up and driving into like a tree or into bushes or something like that. I just didn't want any of that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can you talk through more about how many vehicles we're talking about and how you anticipate different members of your household to be using the cars? Like the packet mentioned a lot of different uses between guest and permanent use. I mean, are you planning to keep the cars in the garage, parked outside the garage? I'd like to have a better understanding of like what the needs or the planned uses.
Yeah, so we plan to have three cars for 4 different drivers, and the cars are planned to be inside the garage. And we don't plan to use, I mean, I'll board it up if you want me to, but to demonstrate it, but I don't plan to use the alley at all whatsoever. There are inherent challenges with the alley. And of note, I will say that all but 2 of the people who signed, my neighbors who signed the, who have access to the alley, all said to me, yeah, the alley really is terrible because of poor drainage and because it's unpaved. And it's really the drainage is the issue with the alley. You know, it's a pond every time it rains, and it ices over during the winter. You know, I have a workshop. I do work like that. My wife does as well. So our total plan was to not use the garage at all whatsoever to drive cars in and out of.
Okay, I was over there today and I couldn't see another way to really get into that garage other than use the alley, and it was unpaved and very icy.
Yeah.
And Darian,
Go ahead.
excuse me, no, please.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Darian, very briefly, just try to illustrate the challenge, even if you were to keep the garage as a, for parking, the challenge given its orientation.
Yeah, so the problem is that there's no setback. I have no idea how this garage was proved because all the other garages have a setback. It's set back like 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 feet from the alley. I am literally right on top of the alley. And it even looks like my garage protrudes into the alley. But I'm limited in the direction. So I can't, because there's no setback and because the alley is not perpendicular, the garage is not perpendicular to the alley, I'm limited by how I can use the garage by which way I go. So if I use the alley from Ingleside, so that's from the north side, I have to pull in forward. All right. I can't, and the only way would be then to pull back out and then keep on going and then keep going south. I can't make the turn the other way. I don't have the room to make the turn. And I even sent multiple pictures to David showing I can't make this turn if you go against the way that the garage is situated. Same in reverse. If I come in from Clinton, I could only back into the garage and only continue to exit the alley heading the north. So I really don't have freedom of movement on both sides like all of my neighbors do, because all my neighbors, their garage is perpendicular and they have a setback. Their garage is set back 3 or 4 feet or 4 or 5 feet from the alley.
And I would just add that it doesn't appear that way on the site plan based on where the property line is, but in fact, in the reality on the ground is that the corner of the garage appears to protrude into what is functionally the alley space. The other implication for not having, for the orientation affecting which way he can enter and exit is, to the extent that one direction is temporarily blocked by garbage trucks or other vehicles which are parked in the alley, then he's potentially constrained with even exiting if that either northbound or southbound, depending on how he had ended up parking the car in the garage, then his exiting is severely constrained by that potential blockage in the driveway. It's not a temporary thing. He doesn't have the option of turning around to the other way.
Yeah.
Another question. I keep going back to, as I have at standard C, the peculiarity to the property, the hardship or difficulty peculiar to the property.
Mm-hmm.
Could you outline how you feel this is a hardship or difficulty peculiar to the property as opposed to peculiar to your hopeful use of the property?
Well, it's, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So the current house is where it's at, right? And the back of the lot doesn't allow, there's not enough space in the back of the lot for the ADU because I have another house there. That's Chris and Jenny that live back there. So the ADU has to be on the side. That's also where the mudroom is. The mudroom happens also to be on the north side of the house. So the only position that I can place the ADU is where it's at now, okay? That is a hardship based on how my house is configured right now. There is no way that I can push that. Now, I did consider, to Cade's point in the DAPR meeting, he had asked, why can't you push the ADU back? Well, the problem with pushing the ADU back is that it would totally change how I would have to configure the inside of the house, because then the entrance of my ADU is into my kitchen. So then I'd have to rearrange my entire inside of the house, change my kitchen, my breakfast room, and the mudroom. Oh my God, that would be insane with the amount of cost that would be. The ADU is as far back as I could possibly push it. I mean, I went back multiple times to my architect and said, push this thing back because I need more space I need the space for the driveway. How am I going to maneuver this? So that has nothing to do, that's not I didn't create that. It's just the way the property is. And I also didn't create the situation of where the garage is at. It's just the garage is where it's at. Is that, I don't know, David, do you have any other thing to add to that?
Well, it's a, the question is the hardship that justifies the circular drive as opposed to the single drive with a 3-point turnaround. And because we're permitted to do a single drive off of Sheridan Road with a 3-point turnaround. And the hardship comes from the fact that the 3-point turnaround that was conceived of would have been for a different house at the far rear of the property where there was more an additional space in which to construct the 3-point turnaround. To Kate's point, the ADU has limitations on where the ADU can be put, and the setback on the property is what it is. There is a front yard setback established by the existing home, and so there's limited geometry in which to locate either the 3-point turnaround in limited area or the circular drive.
I would just point out for members of the board that when you talk about limitations of where the ADU is placed, those aren't code limitations. Those are your own limitations. And that rear portion of the lot is about 70 feet wide. The standard lot is 35 feet wide, and we do get a lot of ADUs on those lots.
My client is proposing it's an attached, not a detached ADU. It's proposing a three-car garage where the other lots that may be able to accomplish ADUs on smaller lots may already have parking that they're utilizing. And a house of this size with this many residents, I think it's pretty standard to expect to try to get three-car garage, especially considering that there's no proximate street parking.
Other questions from the board? If we have none, do we have people that are in support?
Actually, I have one question to staff. What's the parking requirement for this ADU now? That was a two-car garage in the back. So what is the necessary parking requirement for the addition?
There is no parking requirement for the ADU.
But the parking requirement for the house is two cars, right?
Correct, which is the existing condition. Mhm.
And it doesn't change when you add more units.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, that was it.
Okay. Do you have people that have joined our meeting in support of your proposal?
Yes, I've got Alf McConnell and Zach Kustoff. Alf, do you want to start?
All right, my name is Alf McConnell. I live at 2677 Orrington Avenue and have lived here for 40 plus years. I was born and raised in Evanston and have lived most of my 77 years here in Evanston. I'm a real estate developer by profession, having been in the real estate industry for 50 years. My wife and I, our house has a driveway. It's not wide enough to have a circular driveway, so we back into the street. And I'd love to have a wide lot like Darien has to have a circular drive because it's sometimes dangerous backing up. We have to be very careful of people walking on the sidewalk and backing into the street, traffic from both directions, and then pull forward from there. I might mention, I heard somebody mentioned earlier about circular drives on, what was it, Ridge and what other street?
Crawford.
Crawford.
Crawford. Just to the north of Darien's house, there is a house on Sheridan Road that does have a half circle drive, I believe, just
Yeah.
north. One of the advantages of having a half circle drive rather than a lot of pavement that would result in one being able to maneuver around and then pull out would be that you end up having less pavement and therefore more rainwater would be absorbed into the ground. So from an ecological viewpoint, it would be less water going into the city drainage system. This is a bit of an unusual property in that it's two lots and can accommodate a half circle drive. So it's not going to be often that you're going to have somebody making this request. One of my specialties is senior housing. And I've got a senior campus, 6 phases of several hundred units, independent living and assisted living. So I'm particularly sensitive to these issues. And I think that it would be smart for the public in general, because backing out into Sheridan Road would be dangerous because, as you've already witnessed, the sort of traffic that comes along there, the volume of traffic and the speed. And then the people, of course, walking on the sidewalk, it'd be safer with a half circle drive. Any
Thank you.
questions for me?
No questions? Thank you.
And I've got one other person, Zach Kristoff.
Zach Kristoff. Sir?
Hello, how you doing? My name is Zach Kustok. First off, I'd like to thank the board members for everything you do for the city and the service that you do by being on calls like this tonight. I've lived in Evanston for 7 years. I've lived at my current address of 2626 Sheridan Road, which is 2 houses south of the Halligan residence, for about 4.5 years now. And in full transparency, I've met Darian once in person and have had a phone conversation with him on this issue. So I don't have an agenda or a longstanding relationship with Darian other than as a concerned citizen. I'm a father of 5 young children. So living on a busy road like Sheridan, safety is always my number one priority. I know my wife's number one priority. So I think, looking at this, less as from a homeowner's perspective, but from a resident's perspective and visiting the Halligan residence, I just have concern, and that's why I'm on in support of the circular drive. Of any time anyone would have to back onto Sheridan Road, I think it presents significant risk. And like I said, maybe a larger family than most with 5 kids, but have a large vehicle. So, visibility is always a little bit more challenging the larger the vehicles are. And so whether it's, trying to do a 3-point turn and, there's young kids running back and forth or particularly pulling onto Sheridan Road, especially the stretch that I live on and Darian lives on from the light at Central Street to when Sheridan Road curves and turns into Isabella. There are cars that are going faster than the speed limit. I've seen it firsthand. Have also seen that there has been approval for other residents to get a circular drive for the similar reasons of the risk factor. So and I'm not an expert on the zoning rules like you all are, but really just coming from a resident's perspective and not seeing it as jeopardizing the aesthetics or the integrity of Sheridan Road. And for me, it's really just about, the safety and efficacy of a circular drive. And if you can completely eliminate any risk of potentially backing on to Sheridan Road, that's why, I just want to speak on behalf of that and, the safety for the residents coming in and out. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for this guy? From the board? Anybody want to talk to him? Okay. Any more support? Sir, do you have other people that have shown up for this meeting that want to speak in your behalf?
No, ma'am, just the 2, and then the signatures, 75% of the signatures.
Oh, and some signatures, okay. What
For
signature?
what it's worth, my wife is fully supportive as well. She's not on the call and she's with our kids, but I'm speaking on her behalf as well.
I hope she's supportive. Thank you.
Yes.
Alf,
Madam Chair, you asked what signatures. At the end of the packet, starting on page 65 of PDF, is an email which attaches, I think it's 23 properties who had all been in the immediate vicinity who were in support of this.
Okay.
this is Alf McConnell speaking again. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You have the floor.
I might mention that one of the 140 unit apartment community that I developed won the 1998 Pillars of the Industry Award for best property of its kind in the nation. And then a subsequent property was a finalist in a national development competition for best property of its kind in the nation. So I do have a sense of aesthetics, and I like quality real estate. And therefore I'm coming from a different viewpoint than many people. I've only met Darian once in person, and talked to him once or twice on the phone. I did not know Darian before. I have no hidden agenda here. I'm just a neighbor that wants quality neighbors, quality real estate in the neighborhood in Evanston generally.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question for Zach. Hi there. You mentioned that safety is important to you. How do you feel about the fact that your neighbor is trying to double the amount of conflict points between pedestrians and vehicles along the sidewalk, so close to your home?
Sorry, I think that one was for me. You know, you bring up a very good point with that. You know, I view it as an either or, and I think I would rather have one additional point of entry or exit with a clear view versus having someone back out onto Sheridan Road and not be able to see. And, you know, I think not only does backing in and out cause, you know, a conflict point potentially where the driveway is, but if there are any cars swerving out of the way, and, you know, that's, you know, my biggest concern is, as I said, have kids from second grade down to 2.5 years old. And, you know, I even see myself as I'm walking along the sidewalk, there are some cars that are going pretty fast. And for a car to swerve out of the road, there isn't that much space between the curb and the sidewalk. And so I see a bigger risk that is presented if a car has to swerve or move. There's, you know, a park essentially across the street as well. There's a lot of traffic with families and kids, and that being more risky than somebody that is controlled and coming around a circular drive and is able to have a clear view of who's walking back and forth at a very minimal speed versus anywhere between 30 to 45 miles an hour that people are driving on Sheridan Road.
Can I make another observation that while there is technically another conflict point, the circular driveway, and to the extent that it creates some space for guest parking, minimizes the chance that guests who are parking, if they were parking on a T-shaped turnaround area, would have vehicles in that case, which might actually be parked sitting into and blocking the sidewalk. The curved driveway creates more natural parking spaces for people to park who are guest visitors or service cars that won't sit in the sidewalk, pushing pedestrians and bicyclists on the sidewalk out onto the parkway. So I know that's sometimes a concern in cases about driveway access and curb cuts, but I think the circular driveway is better condition for that type of situation.
Well, I have a question. I have a question for you, sir. Do you feel like there's a lot of foot traffic on that block?
Is that for Mr. Kustok?
With the respondent, do you think there's a lot of foot traffic in that area?
I think there is quite a bit of foot traffic with Lighthouse Beach there. There is the park and in the bike lanes that are on the opposite side of the street. But the bike lanes, particularly in the warmer months, have a significant amount of traffic, and you know, I guess to walk along Sheridan Road, you either have to be on one side or the other to access the park or the beach. And not just from residents whose houses are there, but from where parking is. The lot at Lighthouse Beach fills up quite readily in the morning, especially in the summer. And so Evanston residents have to park on other side streets and then are walking to the park and walking to the beach. Like I said many times, very family friendly. So with kids or with strollers or other things that they're taking to the beach with them. So I would say yes, there is fairly high foot traffic there.
Other questions for these people before we close the record and have our discussion?
I just have one more follow-up question. Trying to make sure I understand the use. So you mentioned how 3 cars